Okay, here we are. We're into chapter 11, self, society, and culture. So I've already asked you in a discussion question about how your culture particularly fits. And a lot of people, some people make reference to California in general and the bigger culture, besides their own like smaller culture pieces, but and then society in general and how we interact with that, how that helps interacts with us in our sexual identities and our sexuality. This is a pretty big chapter. There's a lot of slides in this PowerPoint. I'm not going to go get too heavy into that, but I am going to tell you. So for this chapter and the next chapter, anyway, I made a change to the discussion assignment, right? Um, Embedded in these slides are 10 questions. And what I want you to do is when we get there, I'll explain it more, but you're just going to put your 10 answers into the discussion and just need the answers. So while you're scrolling through here, you record your answers, write down your answers, however you want to do it, and then just put them 1 through 10 into the discussion assignment. All right. So, and I'll go over that when we get to it. Right. So sexuality in childhood and adolescence. Right. Uh, what is it? How do we develop sexually as children, as infants? Right. What is appropriate child play? So here, right? We talk about the family teaches us about sex, right? And what is normal sexual development among children and what is non-normative. At what point in the lifespan are we considered to be sexual, which is probably different than what you were thinking. Some sexual behaviors of children, sexual curiosity, interests, behaviors, right? The major sources of our sexual socialization for children. Right? Who are the influences on us? These are all the learning objectives. And how to protect young people's well being while protecting their rights. So, our culture believes that children need to learn gender roles, etc., but not sex. Humans are sexual beings from the beginning, right? You hit puberty, most of you, all of you, past puberty or in the middle of puberty, depending on how long that takes. And resiliency is a big topic. Right? So, cultures vary greatly, right? Like I said, your family is a culture. That culture exists inside a community size culture or a religious size culture, then the societal culture, and then, so it's like an onion, right? Like there's all these different layers of culture that influence us. But the family is our primary source of education at this point. Um, Looking for my notes. Mm. So, um, how do we make decisions? Right? Like the more we know, the better informed decisions you make. That's just with everything in life, not this, right? Unfortunately, we don't always get that information depending on who our family and culture is, right? Some people are very hush hush. Um, so, how do we become emotionally literate, right? How do we see, right? There's modeling, right? Our parents model their relationship, and then we see that as how relationship, that's our first exposure to how relationships should be, right? Um, and then of course, infants as sexual beings. So this can be a very sensitive topic, right? And may surprise many people, right? So to say that that infants are sexual beings. Boys get erections. Both boys and girls have infant boys and girls, right? So you're 5 and 7 months have experienced orgasms. Mm. So how you react to that, right, is how our parents react to that. All of that is very integral in how we develop, right? Uh, so that may surprise some of you, right? But now it's like when you're 5 and 6, and what are appropriate behaviors for children, right? So masturbation, right? Like you don't think about that at those ages typically, but it is something that does. And once again, how does it, what is the reaction to that will temper how we feel about that in ourselves, right? So it's 3 to 7. You're starting to wonder why. Like if you're a boy, you want to know what's the difference between boys and girls. You start thinking about that stuff. You start engaging with your peers. Some people even start playing couples. So you're playing at being couples. It's something this is just a natural thing, and you know, there's when I think back, I remember some of that stuff, right? And it's like with your cousins, maybe even with your brothers and sisters, it's play. It's not anything inappropriate. This is just a list of normal behaviors versus atypical behaviors. So, right, it's normal for children to start asking about what that is, what their penis is, what their breasts are, and all those things, what nipples are. Right, that's a normal thing, right? But it's not. It's normal to ask your parents, right? It's not normal to ask strangers. Okay, so that kind of thing, right? Um, so here's like 2 to 4 year olds. You talk about sex with friends, talks about having a boyfriend and girlfriend. Like it's mostly play. Like I think it's real at the time, but it's mostly zero. Young children, though, like here's one of the things, right? Young children shouldn't be over sexualized, right? And when young children present as over sexualized, it's a concern. And we'll get into some more of that later, right? Um, so children at age 10, they start to becoming more purposeful about their sexual things, right? They seek out more privacy. They're looking their desire, and they're starting to explore their own selves more. That's it, right? And we're moving into puberty, right? So, right. So then what happens? It starts at 6 or 7, but we're starting to progress, and then there's some internal stuff happening to us. Right. And then as we get a little older, right, we get body hair. Men get more body hair than women, right? We get our body shape changes. Women and girls, young girls are developing breasts. Uh, I remember having a huge growth spurt in the 7th grade when I was like 12, I guess. I grew like 5 inches in 1 year. Um, And so here's what happens. These are the details about puberty for girls, and of course, the menstrual cycle is what starts, right? And then for boys, right, you start having ejaculations, right? You ejaculate in your sleep, you know. So these are all the changes. Like puberty is a huge deal, and I'm not gonna say any different. Hmm. Let me see. I missed. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, I need. Oh, shoot. All right. I gotta pause for a minute. We had a little technical glitch, and I had to go back and things because, as I said, there's questions embedded in here, and we had the wrong presentation up. So they help me switch it. So here we go, right? So this is your discussion topic for chapter 11. There are going to be 10 questions. Here are 10 answers. Each one, you just use each answer once. And so here is the first question. Blank are the primary source of sexual socialization. Record your answer somehow, right? That's it. And you keep going. We've been through all of this, so I'm gonna just scroll through. Here's question 2. Our communities, which includes friends, peers, church, school, media, communicate sexual messages and impact our sexual socialization. Blank influence in the particular increases during adolescence. And obviously this is the answers. Each one, again, is only one. So that's it. By the time we got to where we were, I'd already asked 3 questions. So, but now we're going to go back to, I'm just going to jump ahead again, and we're going to go through here. Okay. So, and as I said, you just put your answers in the discussion 1 through 10. I don't need the questions. I just need your answers. And I'm not going to correct your answers necessarily. I'm just going to be taking a look at what it is, right? If we're doing putting the answers in, you're going to get your 20 points for the discussion project. I don't need the answers to be right. I'm just curious to see how it goes. Okay. So here we go. And then this is ethnic diversity, right? There's evidence of significant ethnic variation in Monash for girls, right? African American girls typically reach Monash earlier than white Americans, right? And then there is much heavier ethnic consequences of menstrual process in different cultures. Talk about later. Here's question 4. All right, so just like this, the questions just pop up randomly in slideshow. Now we might start talking about how romance versus sex, right? You start being interested in the opposite sex or the same sex, or who you find out who your attraction is. You start thinking about, what physically appeals to you. So now we're starting to talk about the romance versus sex, right? But also here, how does this happen? How do I find out if I'm gay or not gay? So the fluidity of my attractions during this time of stage in life is typically much more fluid. I'm trying to find out who I am. Trying to find out. I may be attracted to men and women. I may be attracted to men. As a man, I may be attracted to men more than women. Or vice versa. Women can be attracted to men or other women, So this is all very experimental, I guess, at this point, right? So you start forming your sexual identity, right? You're talking to your friends, you're learning, you're getting media messages, all this stuff is happening, and you're trying to figure out who you are. Masturbation again comes into play. This time now we're talking about intentional masturbation, right? Not 5-month-old, 7-month-old masturbation, but intentional masturbation. We maybe start during our relationships, we start becoming more physical in our relationships, uh, whether we're actually, what the level that goes to is it's for each individual. We're going to talk about some stuff later. Here's another question. So here you go. Sexual intercourse is rare among very young teens, but becomes more common in later teenage years, right? Like we didn't know that. I don't think this is new information for you, right? So, and then here is a list of normal sexual behaviors for teens and atypical, right? Which means and behaviors you don't want to see. Now also is the time to be talking, like somebody should be talking to you, or you need to be learning about sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy, contraception, like all the things you need to protect yourself if you're going to become become sexually active. Here's another question. This is the rate of teen pregnancy is 50% lower than back in 1990, right? Here's 1973 to 2013, between 15 and 17-year-olds. It went down. It's kind of steady among those less than 14 years old, but it's a very low number. Among those 18 to 19, it's a much higher number, 150. It looks like around 150 out of 1,000. It peaked a little bit here and then went down. And this trend is almost mimics it. It's almost exactly the same, except maybe a little different right there. Otherwise, you can see these almost run parallel. All right. So teenage pregnancy has dropped. Hopefully, part of that is due to education. We know part of it is due to education. So, how does school fit into this? How does the media fit into this? How does, particularly school? So here in this, we're trying to provide a human sexuality class. Like this, to me, might be a class for freshmen in high school rather than college at this point in time, but it's still beneficial even at this point in time, particularly depending on where you are, right? Like just because you're in college or you're taking a college class does not mean you are emotionally and mentally set you're far from set in who you are sexually, believe me. Okay. So these are all the things that come into play, right? The peers, heavy influence, not the best, right? I always say, you're trying to learn about sex, so you ask the kid next to you who's in the same place that you are, or very close, and so it's like the blind leading the blind. You got to go to a better source than your peers, believe me. Okay? Media, unfortunately, and music and movies and television and the internet are all huge influences on us. How should we act? What is a man like? What is a woman like? What is it like to be gay? What is it like to be bisexual? All these things are portrayed in the media, and sometimes you're pressured to behave in a way that's not you, or your body. Particularly, the worst thing is body images that come across in the media. And what I'm supposed to look like to be attractive, right? Like it's just so detrimental. Another question. So, sexualization, right, is the process of someone being treated as a sex object, right? And this is this is not a good thing. Right? This is not a good thing when somebody just uses you for sex and either leaves or moves on, or maybe even worse, stays and continues to do that. And here again, right? Body image is increasingly an issue, not just for adolescents, but for younger children as well. And all that information is just made up. Hmm? Because what is considered attractive today was not considered attractive 20 years ago, was not considered attractive 100 years ago. All of this changes and all of this develops uh, how much weight I carry, how tall I am, how short I am, what color my hair should be, whether it should be all of this stuff, right? Just changes constantly. And you don't need to be, um, you can be the trendsetter. You don't need to follow the trend. You be who you are, and maybe people will start following you. So all of that and the role of institutions, right? So uh, here's some sexual behavior across time, right? So uh, how since 1982, how we have started using the use of condoms has increased, right? According to this, right? And the other methods of birth control have dropped. Right? And this is like abstinence. We'll talk about withdrawal, all those kind of things. Right? And this is the percentage of adolescents who have had sex, right? So at 10, and it keeps going up and up. And then in 20, obviously, it gets higher and higher. Right? And men tend to be a little bit ahead of women, and having their sexual experiences. Most often because boys are the ones that initiate that type of thing. Not always, but I'm not saying it's, I never say ever, always, but more often than not, it's the boys that initiate sexual activity. Uh, so it's a huge topic. Like things are different everywhere you go. You're going to read all this. Here's another question. Here we're talking about sex education, right? So abstinence only. We tell you not to have sex. It is not effective. We know that approach is not effective. Since the beginning of time, when people first started coming, kids have started having sex. It's the way it is. People have sex. Like it's just not a thing to say don't have sex. Okay, so it's not a realistic approach, right? Um, but this we hope is more of a realistic approach, right? I belong. So here we say, right, Europe and America are very different in their approaches to sexuality for the most part, right? So here's an example for the Netherlands. Sex education begins years earlier. It has better health care. It involves better health care, better support, right? Free access to information, contraceptives, and like I said, much more support on a societal level. The government then, it's a society, as a society, we want something. Typically, the government will get behind it. Always, but typically in the Netherlands for sex education, that is true. And it just seems we have Europeans have a little bit more mature approach to uh, sex education and sexuality than the United States, where we seem to be more constricted. Right. So we'll talk about some of this some more, but right, obviously, it's not appropriate. Sexual interactions between youth of the same age or very close to the same age is appropriate. You adults having sex with children is not. Where the age gap is too bit large, society does not believe that to be the right thing. and you do have sexual rights. You have, there's an age where you're allowed to go on your own to get contraceptives. You don't need your parents' permission. There's all other like kind of legal things that happen too around sex, unfortunately. So here's your question. Here's number 9, right? And then here's some just food for thought for you. Like you need to think about this for yourself. Go through that. Like I said, when I'm doing this, it's like, oh, I remember doing that as a child. Right? Like it brings back memories to me, and yours are much closer. So, um, what was normal? And then this is our final question. Okay, so that's chapter 11. We're going to move right into chapter 12 next. So, as always, reach out to me if you got any questions, if you need any kind of support, available.